Your father left the entire farm to you." The lawyer slid an old brass key across the table. For a moment I thought I had heard him wrong, because the last thing my father ever said to me was that if I stepped off his property, I should never come back. The room seemed to tilt beneath me. Across the table, my brother Michael shot to his feet so quickly his chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "That's impossible," he snapped. "Dad hated her." The lawyer didn't blink. He left very specific instructions. I stared at the key lying between us. Cold, worn smooth from decades of use, the key to the one place I had been forbidden to enter my entire life. And then the lawyer said something that made my stomach drop. "There's one more thing." He pushed a sealed envelope toward me. "Your father said you must visit the Red House before making any decision about the property." The Red House. Even after 20 years, hearing those words sent a chill through me. Because nobody was allowed inside that house. Nobody. And 3 days later, when I finally unlocked that door, I discovered my father had been hiding something from me for nearly half my life. Something that changed everything I thought I knew about him. Everything I thought I knew about myself. Part 1. The Daughter Who Was Banished. The call came on a gray Tuesday morning while I was reviewing personnel reports at Fort Liberty. I almost ignored it. The number was unfamiliar. I had a briefing in 20 minutes, but something made me answer. "Major Catherine Hughes speaking." There was a pause. Then a man's voice. "Major Hughes, this is Samuel Carter." The name meant nothing at first. Then he added, "I was your father's attorney." My chest tightened. I hadn't heard anyone refer to Robert Hughes as my father in years. Not out loud, not directly to me. The silence stretched. Finally he spoke again. "I'm sorry to inform you that your father passed away yesterday evening." I sat perfectly still. The office around me continued moving. Phones rang. Printers hummed. Soldiers walked past my door. But for a few seconds it felt as if the world had stepped away and left me alone. My father was dead. The strange thing wasn't grief. It was confusion. Because how do you mourn someone who erased you from his life 20 years ago? I thanked the attorney, took down the details, ended the call, then sat staring at the wall. I should have felt anger. Maybe relief. Instead I felt hollow, as if a door I had spent 2 decades refusing to open had suddenly slammed shut forever. A framed photograph sat on my desk. My 12-year-old daughter, Emily, grinning with missing front teeth. Beside her stood my husband, David. A good man. A patient man. The kind of man who understood there were parts of my past I didn't discuss. He found me sitting there later that evening. "You okay?" I looked up. My father died. His expression softened immediately. "Oh, Katie." I hated when people looked at me like that. Like they expected tears. Like blood automatically created love. "It's fine," I said. But it wasn't. Not because I missed Robert Hughes. Because now there would never be answers. Only questions. Questions I'd carried since I was 18. The memory still lived inside me with painful clarity. Montana. Summer heat. Dust swirling across the ranch yard. I was standing on the porch holding enlistment papers. My father stood in front of me. 6'3". Broad shoulders. Weathered hands. The strongest man I'd ever known. And the angriest. "You're not joining the army. I already signed. You'll stay here." "No." The word exploded from me before I could stop it. Years of frustration. Years of feeling trapped. Years of being told what my future would be. My father took one step forward. "You belong here." "No, Dad, I don't." His jaw tightened. "You walk away from this family, don't come back." I remember the look in his eyes. Not sadness. Not disappointment. Rage. Pure rage. Or at least that's what I thought at the time. I picked up my duffel bag. Walked toward the waiting bus. And then he said the words that followed me for the next 20 years. "If you leave this farm, Catherine, you're no longer my daughter." I never looked back. 3 days later, I was in basic training. A year later, I was deployed overseas. And from that moment on, Robert Hughes vanished from my life. No birthday calls. No Christmas cards. No congratulations when I earned officer rank. Nothing. The message was clear. I had chosen the army. He had chosen to forget me. 3 days after the phone call, I flew home to Montana. The town looked smaller than I remembered. The mountains seemed lower. The roads narrower. Time had a way of shrinking places. The church was packed for the funeral. Farmers, neighbors, old family friends, people who had known me as a child. The moment I walked inside, conversations slowed. Heads turned. Some recognized me immediately. Others took a second. Then the whispers started. "Catherine. She actually came. After all these years." I kept my shoulders straight. Military posture. Armor I'd learned to wear long ago. At the front sat my brother Michael, 2 years older than me, golden child, future heir, the son who stayed. He glanced at me once, then looked away. No smile, no greeting, no welcome. After the service, people gathered outside beneath the bright Montana sky. Michael finally approached me. "You didn't have to come." I met his eyes. He was still my father. His laugh was short and bitter, not according to him. The words landed harder than I expected, because part of me still feared they were true. Later that afternoon, Samuel Carter asked both of us to meet him at his office. The building smelled like old paper and coffee. Michael sat across from me, impatient and irritated. The attorney opened a folder. Robert Hughes left a detailed estate plan. Michael nodded confidently. Of course he did. Everyone assumed the farm belonged to him, including me. Samuel adjusted his glasses, then read a single sentence. "The Hughes Ranch, including all land structures, livestock assets, and mineral rights, shall pass exclusively to my daughter, Catherine Hughes." Silence. Absolute silence. Michael stared. I stared. Even Samuel seemed uncomfortable. Then Michael exploded. "What?" The attorney calmly repeated the statement. Michael's face turned red. "This is a mistake." "It is not. Dad would have never done that." Samuel opened another folder. The will was updated repeatedly over the last 15 years. Michael looked like he'd been punched. I couldn't blame him. I felt exactly the same. Then Samuel reached into a drawer. He removed an old brass key and a sealed envelope. He placed them directly in front of me. "Your father instructed me to give you these." I stared at the envelope. My name was written across the front, in my father's handwriting. The same handwriting I hadn't seen in 20 years. My throat tightened. "What is this?" Samuel folded his hands. "Instructions." I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Only one paragraph. One final message from the man who had spent 2 decades pretending I didn't exist. And the last sentence made my pulse stop. "Before deciding the future of the ranch, you must enter the red house north of the eastern pasture. Only then will you understand." I looked up. "The red house." Samuel nodded. "Yes." A chill ran down my spine. Because no one had ever been allowed inside. Not me. Not Michael. Not anyone. And judging by the expression on Samuel Carter's face, whatever waited inside that house was the reason my father had left everything to me. I spent that night in a guest room above the old ranch office. Technically, it was my ranch now. The thought felt absurd. I lay awake staring at the ceiling long after midnight, listening to the familiar sounds I hadn't heard since I was a teenager. The distant creak of wooden beams, wind brushing against the windows, the occasional low call of cattle somewhere beyond the darkness. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. My father's funeral had ended less than 12 hours earlier. His will had detonated like a grenade inside the family. Michael barely spoke to me after leaving the attorney's office. When he did, every word sounded forced. Controlled. Dangerously controlled. I understood why. For 20 years, everyone, including Michael, had believed the ranch would belong to him. Now suddenly it belonged to the daughter who had supposedly been disowned. The daughter who had left. The daughter their father had spent decades pretending didn't exist. At least that was the story we'd all believed. I turned over and looked at the brass key sitting on the nightstand. Moonlight reflected off its worn surface. The red house. Even now the words stirred something uncomfortable inside me. Growing up, the house had always been there. A small red structure near the northern edge of the property. Not large. Not impressive. But somehow more mysterious than any building on the ranch. Whenever I asked about it, my father would shut down immediately. "Stay away from it." That was all he'd say. No explanation. No discussion. Just a command. And on our ranch, Robert Hughes's commands weren't suggestions. They were law. As children, Michael and I used to invent stories about what was inside. Hidden gold. Secret weapons. Stacks of cash. A fugitive living in the basement. Normal kid stuff. But every joke ended the same way, with Dad catching us too close and sending us away, sometimes angrily, sometimes with a look in his eyes that I never understood, a look that almost seemed frightened. Around 3 in the morning, I finally drifted into a restless sleep. The next day arrived bright and clear. Montana stretched beneath a flawless blue sky. The mountains stood sharp against the horizon. The air smelled like pine dust and sun-warmed earth, the same scent I remembered from childhood. For a moment, standing outside with a cup of coffee, I felt 18 again. Then reality returned. The ranch hands were watching me. Not openly, but enough. Everyone knew about the will. News traveled fast in small towns, especially bad news, or surprising news. And depending on who you asked, my inheritance was both. I spotted Michael near the equipment shed. He was talking with 2 ranch managers. The moment he saw me, the conversation ended. Neither of us approached the other. Some wounds needed time. Some explosions needed distance. Around noon, I climbed into an old ranch truck and headed north. The key rested in the center console. The envelope sat on the passenger seat. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I had spent years convincing myself I no longer cared about Robert Hughes. Years telling myself I'd moved on. Yet here I was, driving toward a building he'd forbidden me to enter, still obeying his instructions even after death. The dirt road narrowed as I moved deeper into the property. Fields stretched endlessly in every direction. Golden grass rippled beneath the wind like waves across an ocean. I remembered riding horses here, helping repair fences, running through these fields with Michael when life was simpler. Before resentment, before silence, before 20 years disappeared. Then I saw it, the red house, standing alone near a cluster of cottonwood trees. Exactly as I remembered. The paint had faded. The roof looked older, but otherwise time seemed unable to touch it. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat motionless for several seconds. Something felt strange. Not threatening, not dangerous, just strange, as though I were standing at the edge of a memory. Eventually I stepped out. The wind moved softly through the trees. The house stood silent, waiting. The brass key felt surprisingly heavy in my hand. I walked up the porch steps. Each board groaned beneath my boots. The front door was painted deep red, weathered by decades of Montana winters. For a second I hesitated. What if this was some cruel final joke? What if there was nothing inside? What if my father had spent 20 years controlling me and was somehow still doing it from the grave? I took a breath, inserted the key, turned it. Click. The lock opened. My pulse immediately quickened. I pushed the door inward. The hinges creaked softly. Dust floated through shafts of sunlight. And then I froze. Because the first thing I noticed wasn't dust. It wasn't decay. It wasn't abandonment. It was cleanliness. The house looked maintained, carefully maintained. The furniture was spotless. The hardwood floors gleamed. The curtains hung neatly in place. A grandfather clock stood against one wall. Ticking. Actually ticking. I stared. The house had been locked for years, maybe decades, yet somehow it looked occupied, like someone had walked out only moments earlier. A strange chill crawled up my spine. Slowly I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of cedarwood and old paper. Nothing else. No mold. No neglect. No signs of decay. Every room appeared preserved, protected, as though frozen in time. I moved through the small living area first, then a dining room, then a kitchen. Each room felt ordinary, yet deeply personal. The feeling intensified as I entered a narrow hallway. 3 doors lined one side. One stood partially open. I pushed it wider, and immediately stopped breathing. Photographs, hundreds of photographs, covering every wall, every shelf, every surface. My photographs. I stepped closer. Confused? A graduation photo from officer candidate school. A newspaper clipping announcing my promotion to captain. An image taken during a deployment ceremony. A photograph of me shaking hands with a general. Another from Afghanistan. Another from Germany. Another from Kuwait. My pulse thundered inside my ears. No! The word escaped before I realized I was speaking. I moved deeper into the room. More photographs. More newspaper articles. More military publications, some I'd never even seen myself. Someone had collected them, organized them, preserved them, for years. My eyes found a frame near the window. Inside was a photograph of me receiving a Bronze Star. I remembered that day vividly. The ceremony, the applause, the pride, the empty seat where family should have been. I had looked into the crowd that day, searching, even though I knew he wouldn't come. Yet somehow, my father had gotten the photograph. My hands trembled. I stared around the room. The walls felt like a timeline of my adult life. Every deployment, every achievement, every milestone. The years unfolded around me in silent images. 20 years. 20 years of moments. 20 years of proof. Proof that Robert Hughes had never stopped watching. Never stopped following my life. Never stopped caring. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Anger and confusion collided inside me. If he cared, why didn't he call? Why didn't he write? Why didn't he tell me? I continued searching. The room seemed endless. Boxes filled shelves from floor to ceiling. Labels covered each one. Iraq, Afghanistan, Germany. Promotions, Commendations. Newspaper articles. I opened one carefully. Inside were dozens of newspaper clippings. All about me. Some local, some national. Every article highlighted. Every mention of my name marked in yellow ink. I felt dizzy. The man who supposedly erased me had spent decades collecting evidence of my life. Then I noticed another door, half hidden behind a bookshelf. My heartbeat accelerated. Slowly I crossed the room, turned the handle, and stepped inside. The second room was even more shocking. A giant wall map covered nearly the entire far side. Pins marked locations across the world. Red pins, blue pins, yellow pins. Dozens of them. I approached, and immediately recognized the pattern. Every pin corresponded to somewhere I had served. Every base, every deployment, every assignment. My father had tracked my movements across the globe. For 20 years, I stared at the map in disbelief. Then my eyes landed on a wooden desk beneath it. One drawer stood slightly open, as though someone had forgotten to close it. I pulled it wider. Inside lay a single envelope, yellowed with age. My name written across the front. Not Major Hughes, not Catherine. Just one word. Katie. The name my father used when I was little. My hand suddenly felt weak. I opened the envelope carefully, removed the folded pages, and read the first sentence. Katie. If you're reading this, then I never found the courage to tell you the truth while I was alive. The room seemed to disappear around me, because for the first time in 20 years, I realized my father had been keeping far more than memories inside this house. He had been hiding a secret, and whatever truth waited inside those pages was about to destroy everything I believed about the day he threw me out. For several seconds, I simply stood there holding the letter. The room around me seemed unnaturally quiet. The ticking clock in the other room faded. The wind outside disappeared. Even my own breathing felt distant. 20 years. 20 years of anger. 20 years of unanswered questions. And now the answers were resting in my hands. I lowered myself into the chair beside the desk. The wood creaked softly beneath my weight. Then I unfolded the pages and began to read. Katie, if you're reading this, then I am gone. And if I am gone, it means I failed to tell you what I should have told you a long time ago. The day you left the ranch was the hardest day of my life. I know you believed I stopped loving you. The truth is exactly the opposite. I loved you enough to let you hate me. I stopped reading. My eyes burned. A bitter laugh escaped my throat. That sounded like something from a movie. Something people said after causing unimaginable pain. Yet, for some reason, I kept reading. Maybe because after 20 years I needed to know everything. Maybe because part of me was afraid to stop. The next paragraph changed everything. You were never supposed to stay here. You were always meant for something bigger than this ranch. I knew that long before you did. I knew it when you were 10 years old and spent your afternoons reading military history instead of riding horses. I knew it when you told me you wanted to serve your country. And I was proud of you. More proud than I ever said. I closed my eyes. Proud. The word felt foreign. For years I had convinced myself my father viewed my military career as a betrayal. Now I wasn't sure what to believe. I continued reading. Then the letter took a darker turn. A truth I never expected. Years before you enlisted, a problem from my past came back. A problem I thought had died long ago. But it didn't. It found me again. And it found you. My pulse quickened. I sat forward. Suddenly every sentence mattered. When I was younger, your grandfather borrowed money from dangerous people. The debt disappeared on paper. But debts like that never truly disappear. Not for men like them. Not for families like ours. I frowned. My grandfather had died when I was a child. I remembered almost nothing about him. The letter continued. A few months before your enlistment, I received a visit. 2 men. They knew everything about you. Your schedule. Your school. Your plans. They made it clear that if I didn't cooperate with them, they could reach you. My stomach tightened. The room suddenly felt smaller. I kept reading. At first I thought they were bluffing. Then they mailed me photographs. Pictures of you. Pictures they should never have been able to take. That was the moment I realized the threat was real. I stared at the page. A cold sensation spread through my chest. The military teaches you how to recognize danger, how to identify patterns, how to spot warning signs. And what I was reading felt disturbingly real. Not dramatic, not exaggerated. Real. My father's handwriting remained steady throughout the next paragraph, almost painfully calm. I contacted federal authorities. The investigation lasted months. They advised me that the safest option was distance. Real distance. The less connected you appeared to me, the less value you had as leverage. I stopped breathing. My eyes raced across the words. I wanted it to be false. I wanted it to be some elaborate justification. Instead, every sentence felt horrifyingly plausible. Then I reached the line that shattered me. So I became the villain. I made sure everyone believed I had rejected you. Including you. Especially you. Because if you knew the truth, you would never have left me behind. And leaving was the only way I knew to keep you safe. The page blurred. I lowered it slowly. My hands were shaking. I stared across the room at hundreds of photographs. 20 years of evidence. 20 years of silent watching. 20 years of hidden pride. For the first time since entering the house, a possibility entered my mind. What if he wasn't lying? What if the man I spent half my life hating had sacrificed our relationship for reasons I never understood? I hated the thought. Because if it was true, then everything hurt even more. I stood and walked to one of the filing cabinets. There were dozens of drawers, each carefully labeled. One drawer carried a simple tag, Documents. I pulled it open. Inside sat folders arranged in chronological order. Government correspondence, legal records, investigation summaries, names I recognized, agencies I recognized. The deeper I looked, the harder it became to dismiss the story. Some records were heavily redacted. Others weren't. But together they painted a picture that matched the letter. An investigation, surveillance, threat assessments, recommendations, warnings. For nearly an hour I stood there reading. Every page chipped away at 20 years of certainty. By the time I finished, my head hurt. I sat down again, exhausted, emotionally drained, and completely lost. Because there was one problem. Even if everything was true, even if every word in the letter was accurate, he still chose not to tell me. 20 years, 20 birthdays, 20 Christmas mornings, 20 years of silence. No explanation erased that. No secret made that easy. A sudden noise startled me. A truck door slamming outside. I looked through the window. Michael. He climbed out of his pickup and headed toward the house. His expression was already angry. A few moments later, the front door opened. His boots crossed the floor. Then he appeared in the doorway. For a second, he froze, just as I had. His eyes swept across the photographs covering the walls. The newspaper articles. The military memorabilia. The countless reminders of my life. "What is all this?" he asked quietly. I handed him one of the photo albums. He opened it. Turned several pages. His face gradually lost color. "Dad did this?" I nodded. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then I handed him the letter. He read. And read. And read. When he finally looked up, anger replaced shock. "No. What? No." He tossed the letter onto the desk. "This is ridiculous." I stared at him. "Michael." "No." His voice rose. "He abandoned you. He might have been trying to protect me. Or he was trying to ease his conscience." The words hit harder than I expected, because part of me had already considered the same possibility. Michael paced across the room. "This doesn't make sense." "It might." "No." He pointed toward the photographs. "If he loved you so much, why didn't he pick up a phone?" I had no answer. Because that question haunted me too. Michael shook his head. "This is guilt, that's all it is." "Maybe. Or maybe he realized he made a mistake and couldn't admit it." I looked away. Neither explanation felt satisfying. Neither explanation healed anything. The truth, whatever it was, remained buried somewhere beneath decades of silence. Then another voice interrupted us. "There's more." We both turned. Samuel Carter stood in the doorway. I hadn't even heard him arrive. The attorney looked older than he had at the funeral. Tired, like a man carrying a burden for far too long. Michael folded his arms. "What do you mean more?" Samuel stepped into the room. His gaze moved briefly across the walls, then settled on me. "Your father instructed me not to reveal everything unless you found this house." My heartbeat immediately accelerated. The attorney reached into the leather briefcase hanging from his shoulder. Then he removed a small wooden box. Old, weathered, locked. He carried it to the desk and placed it in front of me. Neither Michael nor I spoke. Samuel rested one hand on the lid, and when he finally spoke, his voice sounded unusually serious. "Catherine." He paused. "As difficult as this letter may have been to read, it isn't the biggest secret your father left behind." The room went silent. I stared at the box, then at Samuel, and for the first time since opening the door to the Red House, I realized the truth wasn't waiting at the end of this journey. It was only beginning. For a long moment, nobody touched the box. It sat in the center of the desk like a living thing. Small, ordinary, yet somehow heavier than everything else we'd discovered that day. The photographs, the letters, The files. The decades of secrets. All of it seemed to point toward this moment. Samuel slid a key across the desk. Not the brass key from the Red House. A different one. Smaller. Darker. Older. "Your father gave me this 6 years ago," he said quietly. Michael let out a frustrated breath. How many secrets did he have? Samuel didn't answer. Maybe because he didn't know. Or maybe because he did. I picked up the key. My fingers felt strangely numb. The lock opened with a soft click. Then I lifted the lid. Inside was a folded map. Nothing else. No money. No documents. No explanation. Just a map. Michael frowned. "That's it." I unfolded it carefully. Immediately I recognized the ranch boundaries. The western pasture. The creek. The north fence line. The livestock fields. Every acre was marked in precise detail. Then I noticed a red circle near the far northeastern section of the property. A place rarely visited anymore. An abandoned equipment barn. Beside the circle, my father's handwriting appeared. "For Catherine. The final truth is here." A silence settled over the room. I looked up. Samuel gave a slow nod. "That's where he wanted you to go next." Michael rubbed his face. "This is insane." But even he sounded less angry now. More confused than anything else. Because regardless of how we felt about our father, one fact had become impossible to ignore. Nothing about this was random. Every step had been planned. Every discovery intentional. As though Robert Hughes had built an enormous trail for us to follow after his death. And somehow we'd reached the final stage. An hour later, Michael and I were driving across the ranch together. The atmosphere inside the truck felt strange. Not friendly. Not hostile. Just uncertain. 20 years earlier, we'd been siblings. Now we were practically strangers. The only thing connecting us was a dead man and a mountain of unanswered questions. The old barn appeared on the horizon shortly before sunset. I hadn't visited it since high school. The structure leaned slightly to one side. Weathered wood covered its exterior. The roof sagged in several places. Tall grass surrounded the building. Nothing about it looked important. Nothing suggested it contained a life-changing secret. Yet my pulse accelerated the moment we stepped out of the truck. The evening wind moved through the fields. Somewhere in the distance, cattle called out. The mountains glowed orange beneath the setting sun. For a second, the entire ranch looked beautiful. Peaceful. The way my father always saw it. Then Michael pulled open the barn door. The hinges screamed. Dust drifted through the air. Inside stood old machinery. Broken equipment. Rusting tools. Exactly what we'd expected. Nothing more. Michael laughed bitterly. Fantastic. I looked around. There had to be something else. My father wouldn't send us here for a pile of junk. I unfolded the map again. Studied it carefully. Then noticed something. The red circle wasn't centered on the barn. It was slightly behind it. Near the rear wall. I walked deeper inside. Past a tractor. Past old feed containers. Past stacks of lumber. Then I stopped. The ground looked different. Subtle, but different. The concrete floor changed color near the back corner. Almost as if a section had been replaced. "Michael." He joined me. "What?" I pointed downward. We knelt, brushed away dirt, and suddenly saw it. A metal ring embedded in the floor. My heart began pounding. Michael grabbed the ring. Pulled. Nothing. Together we pulled harder. The concrete section lifted upward. A hidden hatch. Neither of us spoke. We simply stared. Then Michael switched on a flashlight. A narrow staircase disappeared into darkness below. For the first time all day, genuine fear touched me. Not because I expected danger. Because I knew something important waited down there. Something my father had spent years protecting. Slowly we descended. The air felt cool. Dry. Still. The stairs ended after about 20 feet. Michael swept the flashlight across the darkness. Then both of us froze. The underground room wasn't a bunker. It wasn't a vault. And it certainly wasn't filled with money. It was something far more unexpected. A museum. My father's museum. The flashlight revealed shelves stretching across every wall. Glass display cases. Framed photographs. Military memorabilia. Letters. Awards. Books. Boxes. Thousands of items. Every single one connected to me. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The room felt like 20 years of my life gathered into one place. My entire military career surrounded us. Every deployment patch. Every article. Every photograph. Every achievement. Every failure. Everything. I walked forward slowly, almost afraid to touch anything. One display case contained copies of every letter I'd mailed home during basic training. Letters I assumed nobody had saved. Another contained newspaper stories from my deployments. Another held photographs. Hundreds of them. Some taken from newspapers. Others from military publications. Still others from social media. Every milestone preserved. Every moment remembered. The deeper I walked, the harder it became to see clearly. Because tears kept blurring my vision. My father hadn't forgotten me. Not for a single day. A lump formed in my throat. I stopped beside a wooden shelf. There carefully arranged sat birthday cards, 20 of them. One for every year we'd spent apart. None had been mailed. None had been opened. Each envelope carried my name. My fingers brushed the first one, then the second, then the third. I couldn't bring myself to open them. Not yet. The pain felt too large, too complicated. Nearby stood a worn leather chair facing an old television. I stared at it, confused. Samuel's voice echoed from behind us. I hadn't realized he'd followed us down. Your father spent most evenings here. I turned. The attorney stood quietly near the stairs. He looked emotional, more emotional than I'd ever seen him. He watched military news every night, Samuel continued. If a story involved one of your units, he recorded it. I looked back at the chair. Suddenly I could see him there, alone. Older every year, watching television, searching for glimpses of a daughter he couldn't speak to. The image hit me harder than anything else. Harder than the photographs. Harder than the letters. Harder than the files. Because loneliness leaves fingerprints. And this room was covered with them. I heard movement beside me. Michael had stopped near another display case. His shoulders trembled slightly. At first I thought he was angry. Then I realized he was crying. The sight shocked me. My brother rarely showed emotion, even as children. But now tears ran openly down his face. He loved you, he whispered. The words barely reached me. I stared at him. Michael laughed sadly. All the bitterness seemed to drain from him at once. I spent 20 years believing he chose me. His voice cracked. But he never stopped thinking about you. Neither of us knew what to say after that. There are moments when language simply isn't enough. This was one of them. Then Samuel cleared his throat. Catherine. I turned. He pointed toward a cabinet near the far wall. Unlike everything else in the room, it was locked. A small digital screen glowed on its front. My pulse quickened. What is it? Samuel smiled sadly. The last thing your father left for you. Slowly I approached. The cabinet door opened with a soft click. Inside sat a laptop. Nothing else. Just a laptop. Attached to the screen was a handwritten note. In my father's unmistakable handwriting. For my daughter. Watch this alone. My hands began trembling. I lifted the computer carefully. Opened the screen. A single video file waited on the desktop. Its title was simple. For Katie. I stared at it. Unable to move. Unable to breathe. Because somehow I already knew. Whatever was inside that video would be the final piece. The final truth. The final conversation. And perhaps the final chance for a father to tell his daughter everything he never found the courage to say while he was alive. I waited until after midnight to watch the video. Not because I was busy. Not because I was tired. Because I was afraid. For 2 decades I'd carried a version of my father inside my head. A hard man. A stubborn man. A man who chose his pride over his daughter. That version had been cracking apart since I opened the door to the red house. And now, sitting alone in the underground room he'd built beneath the ranch, I suspected it was about to disappear completely. The leather chair creaked softly as I sat down. The same chair Samuel said my father had occupied night after night. The laptop rested on the desk in front of me. The glow from the screen illuminated the darkness. Outside the underground room, the ranch slept beneath a Montana sky filled with stars. Inside, my hands shook as I clicked the file. The screen turned black. Then an image appeared. My father. Older than I remembered. Much older. His hair had gone almost completely gray. The deep lines in his face looked carved rather than aged. For several seconds he simply stared into the camera, not speaking, not moving, as though gathering courage. Then he smiled. And the smile nearly broke me, because it wasn't the smile of the man who threw me out. It was the smile of the father who taught me how to ride a horse. The father who carried me on his shoulders when I was little. The father I'd lost long before he died. Hi, Katie. His voice filled the room. My throat tightened instantly. I've recorded this message about 12 times. He laughed softly. Maybe 13. I found myself laughing through tears. That sounded exactly like him, even after everything. Every version sounded wrong. His eyes lowered briefly. So I'm going to tell the truth instead. The smile faded. A long silence followed. Then he spoke the words I had waited 20 years to hear. "I'm sorry." I closed my eyes. The room blurred, not because the words erased anything, because they didn't. 20 years of pain doesn't disappear with two simple words. But they mattered. God, they mattered. I should have found another way. His voice trembled slightly. I told myself I was protecting you. Another pause. Maybe I was. He looked away from the camera. But I was also scared. The admission surprised me. My father had never admitted fear. Not once in his life. Yet here it was. Raw and unfiltered. I was scared I'd lose you. A sad smile appeared. And in trying not to lose you, I lost you anyway. The words hit with devastating force. Because they were true. For both of us. He leaned forward slightly. If you're watching this, then you've already seen the red house. I nodded unconsciously, as though he could somehow still see me. You've seen all the photographs. His eyes filled with tears. I never missed a newspaper article. I swallowed hard. I never missed a promotion. His voice cracked. I never stopped being proud of you. The room went completely silent except for the sound of my own breathing. 20 years. 20 years of wondering whether I had disappointed him, whether he was ashamed of me, whether joining the army had cost me my family. And all along he'd been collecting every achievement like treasure. My father wiped his eyes, then continued. There were days I wanted to call. His gaze lowered. More days than I can count. A painful smile touched his face. I'd pick up the phone. He laughed quietly. Then I'd put it back down. Another pause. I kept telling myself I'd explain everything tomorrow. The sadness in his voice felt almost unbearable. Then tomorrow became another year, and another, until there was no time left. For a moment neither of us spoke. One alive, one gone, separated by a screen and 20 years of silence. Then he reached beside him and lifted a folder. I didn't leave you the ranch because I felt guilty. The statement surprised me. I left it to you because you're the only one who understands service. He held up several documents. The ranch isn't the real inheritance. My pulse quickened. What is, I whispered, as though he might answer. The real inheritance is what comes next. The video shifted. Several images appeared on screen. Architectural drawings, financial plans, property maps, construction designs. I stared in confusion. Then understanding slowly began to form. My father had spent years developing a project. A massive project. The ranch would remain operational, but large sections would be transformed into something entirely new. Housing for veterans, support services, mental health programs, scholarships for military families, emergency assistance for wounded service members. The vision was enormous, far larger than I expected, far larger than a simple charity. I wanted to build something that mattered. His voice returned. Something that outlives me. A faint smile crossed his face, but I knew I couldn't do it alone. His eyes met the camera, and somehow felt as though they were meeting mine. You can. The tears I'd been fighting finally escaped. Not dramatic, not uncontrollable, just quiet, steady, the kind that comes from realizing someone understood you better than you realized. My father leaned back. The years seemed visible in his face. The loneliness, the regret, the love, all of it. If I've learned anything, Katie, he paused, it's that life doesn't give us enough time. I stared at the screen, unable to look away. So don't waste yours carrying anger. His voice softened. Not toward me. The room felt smaller somehow, more intimate, like a conversation rather than a recording. Then came his final words. The last gift, the last wound, the last act of love. I loved you the day you left. A tear rolled down his cheek. I loved you every day after. Another silence. Then, and I love you now. The screen faded to black. The video ended. I sat motionless for a very long time. Eventually, dawn arrived. The first sunlight filtered through the small windows above the underground room. I wiped my face, closed the laptop, and stepped outside. The ranch stretched before me. Golden fields, rolling hills, endless sky. The same land I'd once run away from. The same land my father had spent his life protecting. Footsteps approached behind me. Michael. Neither of us spoke immediately. Then he asked the question that mattered most. What are you going to do? I looked across the property, toward the mountains, toward the future, toward everything my father had left unfinished. And for the first time, the answer felt clear. I'm not selling. Michael nodded, almost as though he'd expected that. A year later, the Hughes Veterans Foundation opened its doors. Families arrived from across the country. Veterans found housing. Scholarships were awarded. Lives changed. The ranch became something bigger than land, bigger than inheritance, bigger than regret. Michael stayed. So did I. And slowly we became brother and sister again. Not because the past disappeared, because we finally stopped letting it define us. One afternoon, nearly 2 years after my father's death, my daughter Emily stood beside me overlooking the fields. The wind moved through the grass. The mountains glowed beneath the setting sun. She slipped her hand into mine. "Mom." "Yeah." She looked toward the horizon. "Did Grandpa really love you?" For a moment I couldn't answer. I thought about the red house, the photographs, the letters, the underground room, the video, the years of silence, and the years of love hidden beneath it. Finally I smiled. "Yes." Emily looked up at me. I squeezed her hand gently. "He loved me more than he knew how to say." We stood there quietly as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt at peace. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to think about the people you love and the words that may still be waiting to be said. Life moves faster than we expect, and sometimes tomorrow doesn't arrive the way we planned. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything you believed? Leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy powerful stories about family resilience, justice, and second chances, be sure to subscribe and join us. We share new stories every day, and we'd be honored to have you with us on the journey.